Welcome. What's going on? You're coaching currently?
Yeah, coaching currently. Still coaching the semi-pro team over here, which is basically made up of like 7 full-time professional players, and then the rest of the roster is made up of our better under 19 like national team players. So right now we've got about 3 guys who played for me in the summer on the national junior under 18 team. And then we got 7 pro guys. But the dilemma I have, Chris, is sometimes my junior players are outplaying the senior players. So, we're paying money to guys who sometimes I'm sitting on the bench in crunch moments. But that's the type of team I'm working with at the moment, mate.
Good for some context in terms of that. And I hope that mostly that the coaches that are on this call direct us with questions. All of them would have heard your podcast. Many of our members obviously love the podcast, love the ideas that you've shared and Mark shared as well. So I'll get the ball rolling with the question from Damien, and that's, how does Alan introduce the review process in the beginning? And if you could go into a little bit of detail, because I think a lot of coaches were really intrigued. And then I think going into next year, a lot of them will be using these ideas.
Well, it really came about from just in the first meeting with the players in the preseason, having a conversation about what we wanted the season to be. Like, what did we want to get out of it as a team, as individuals? So you almost start with the end in mind and say, how do you want this to finish up? And everybody says the same thing. We want to be the best we can be. We want to win some will say we want to win a championship. I'll say, well, what does that look like? What does that look like on a daily basis? Well, on a daily basis, it means that we practice hard, we play hard, we look after ourselves, we do the right things, we make effective choices. So I say, well, how do we know we're making effective choices? And they were like, they don't know what to answer when you ask them those type of questions. So you say, well, do we need to reflect and review on what we do on a weekly basis? Do we need to self-assess? Do we need to get the perspective of others about how we're doing with what we're doing? Should we audit things, like check things on a regular basis about what value is this giving us? So everyone's in agreement with that type of system, that type of process works. So you get them to, my thing was to always get them to understand the value of what we're doing, and then pitch it to them, as opposed to saying, guys, because I've done this one before, Chris. I've approached the season where I said, we're going to review, and with all due respect, the American guys were a nightmare. Like the import players we brought over wouldn't buy into it. Like, I'd get them to say, guys, this is how we're going to review after every game. You're going to put your thoughts and feelings about how I coached, about how you played, about how the team played. You're going to put that in a WhatsApp group and you're going to share it with everyone. And all of a sudden, they're compliant for the first few weeks. And then they start to get comfortable in the country and they get comfortable with the day-to-day operations. And all of a sudden they start challenging you, saying, well, I don't understand this process, coach, because they're getting called out by other players, maybe if they're not playing well in a firm-friendly way or in an honest way. It's not necessarily a platform for calling people out. I don't want to give that perception, but that's how it can be received. So I learned after screwing it up for a couple of years that a better way to do it is to sell them the value of what we're going to do before I implement a system and a process. Implementing systems and process, and even a style of game, man, and if you sell the process to them and the value of the process, they generally buy into it. When they generally buy into it, they generally deliver it better, or they'll keep it alive longer. So that first session was a lot about me selling them the value of us doing a review process. And then I would break it down and share with them what a review process looked like. And this year I showed them videos of last year's team, what it looked like with them talking in timeouts, what it looked like with those players talking in the changing room. And when watching that video, I would say to our guys, what do you see? And they would say, whatever they saw. And I said, well, what do you not see? And some would, and if they didn't answer, I would say, well, what we didn't see is guys pointing the fingers at each other. What we didn't see, guys, is shouting and screaming at each other. What we didn't see is a blame culture, which can often happen. So we had to educate them about what was acceptable and unacceptable in the review process, in a changing room at halftime, in a timeout during the game. Then I showed them, I put up on the screen a list of last year's WhatsApp discussions. So they had a real life example of what an effective, purposeful WhatsApp review looks like after a game or after a practice. And I explained to them as well. I said, look, you guys will get better at this process as the season goes on. So if you're uncomfortable with it at the start, then you're normal. If you're uncomfortable at the start, it just means you haven't done it before. And things generally got better, Chris. But I'll tell you the pitfalls of it. And the pitfalls I have this year as well. Just because you explain it, sell the value of it, get them to buy in, doesn't mean it's smooth sailing. Because as soon as a pro guy is not playing well, his perspective changes somewhat on himself, particularly, and can be quick to point the finger and hide behind the ego and hide behind other people, or point pushing them out to the front. But the challenges I've always had with it is up until around Christmas. So we go late August till May, till April is our season, and we get to around end of September, October. And the guys are saying the same stuff. They're ticking boxes with it. And it's not honest. Some are doing it because they feel like, or whoever puts in the first message, the first review, that will set the trend for how everybody else will follow, depending on who that player is. So if that's an influential senior player, a rookie and the younger guys will follow that lead. So I had to do a few different things. One of them was brought him up to a classroom before practice one night in October. No, it's my second year role having to do the exact same thing. I said to the guys, fellas, I got to be honest with you. I don't think your reviews are honest. And I said, I'm basing it on the last game where I didn't coach well, but you all said I did a good job. So I think we need to peel it back to its foundation and remember the value and the purpose and the reason we're doing this. So let's unpick my coaching performance from Saturday. And I would tell them my thoughts on that coach. So I'm putting myself out there. If I coach bad, I say it. If I coach well, I say it. And the other thing I've had to do is tell some of the senior players or the more experienced ones to back off a little bit. Don't put your review in last. Don't put it in first. And I might covertly set that up or bump a younger guy to say, I want your review to be the first one we see after tomorrow night's game. So there's some of the pitfalls and some of the ways around the pitfalls with it.
Well, that's great, because that was actually something I was going to ask, is just some of the challenges that coaches should be aware of that are going to happen in terms of, as you said, pitfalls. And you talked about some of the American players and some of their resistance to it. Do you see resistance in other forms as well, in terms of non-compliance, or, as you said, like telling you what you want to hear rather than being honest?
Yeah. I mean, another pitfall is like I'm experiencing this year. We've got a guy who came out of a Division II school. He actually signed to a higher level than us this year, but he got loaned out to us for a year. And as a performance athlete, he's very difficult in terms of the ego is very strong and self-preservation is very much alive. So with him, I've had to manage him a lot one-to-one, because guys will be honest and, they might say some stuff. They might say some stuff in the group about, like, Liam needs to be better on the boards, or, you give up a lot of points in the post. So you need to be lower, wider, be on the top side area, run to the top side in transition. Don't run to the rim. They would say good stuff, like really good stuff, And he struggled with it. He still struggles with it. So it involved me sitting down with him a lot one-to-one and explaining to him the motive of other people on his team. So we're going down a complete psychological rabbit hole here with him, and for me, it's been awesome because I've had to be better. Like, I've spoken to people like Bill Bezic or, Stephen Rowling, who's a clinical psychologist. I've reached out to Bruce Tully from Canada Basketball and spoke to a bunch of these guys about how I can better influence him to understand the value of why his teammates do it and to get him to be more receptive of it. So I haven't had all the answers, but I've definitely had sources I've gone to help me with that. And one thing I've done with him is, like, just to get him to understand the motive of why people are doing it, the motive of why I set it up, the bigger picture perspective. And I think, Chris, one of the things I really try to hone in on, whether it's this type of stuff, whether it's the review process, whether it's a psychological thing, whether it's a technical, tactical thing, I've always tried to keep the player's perspective and connection on the bigger picture. Why are we doing all the stuff we're doing? So for these pro guys, it's for their next contract. That's reality. It's to make double the money they make from us. For the younger guys, the bigger picture is a scholarship to the US, or it's making next year's senior national team or under 20 national team. So a connection to that bigger picture with whatever we do is always the catalyst that brings it all together. And when we keep that connection alive and we keep referring back to it, you can get guys to buy into a lot of stuff.
That's great. And I guess one thing I'm curious about is um, youth teams. And has this been used with, I assume it has, with any women's team, girls team? And if there's any inherent differences with it, I wouldn't think so, but there might be in terms of how they express and how they are willing to share.
I don't have a lot of contact with female teams. You're talking about female teams, Chris, right?
Absolutely. I'm curious with youth level and female teams because by and large, your examples are with pro players.
Yeah. So with the youth teams, let me go youth teams first. Let me go female teams first because it'll be a shorter conversation on that one. I don't have a lot of interaction with female teams, but our academy program, which I'm the director of our academy program, which is that 16 to 19-year-old performance pathway. You know, we get a lot of the regional or national team kids here. They come from different countries as well. We got a couple of Spanish guys come over. We got an Australian guy that came over. So with them, we have the female team, and I oversee it, but I don't coach it. But any interaction I have with the female players, I'm always led to, and our coaches of the female teams are not very good with this. We have some Spanish coaches who are quite resistant to it, if I'm being honest. And they're very much about get on the court, do as I do as I say kind of thing, which is fine. And it's not every Spanish coach. I'm not generalizing. So my interactions with the females are, I think they'd be better because I find they're more honest with themselves and they have a better perspective on what reality is. And that's just from my interactions with our female teams. Now, let me talk to you about so I can't give you much more than that, Chris, on that one. Let me talk to you about the junior players. The under 14s, under 12s, and the under 16s in this club I'm in. I'm mentoring these coaches to coach the kids with these principles and practices of helping a player to self-manage, helping a player to problem solve live under pressure. What tools, strategies, techniques can you give them so they can self-review live in the moment? Why? Because the very next thing you do can be better. So I'm teaching them these tools and principles and practices of self-reviewing live in action in the moment, which involves effective communication. We can talk about in a second if you want, which involves effective communication between a player and a coach or a player and a player, which is even more important. Now, we're using these tools, concepts, techniques, and practices and principles with these 12s, 14s, and 16s. Chris, they are nailing it better than any pro player or any national team player I've ever worked with. And I'll give you a simple reason as to why. When you have a blank canvas, you can paint any picture you want. But when someone gives you a picture that's got a canvas with half a picture on it, you're limited to what else you can put on the canvas. What I'm trying to say is there's no filter with the young guys. They're coming through. Our 12-year-olds are probably playing basketball for the first time. The 14-year-olds might play a bit of soccer or rugby or whatever, but they're not exposed to a lot of coaching. Whereas the pro guys that come to us have just had experiences of other programs, other coaches. So they're ingrained, their ways, their habits are pretty much ingrained. And that's my challenge every year. How much can I influence them? Not that I'm going to coach them better, but how can I influence them to add competencies to themselves to self-regulate better is effectively what we're saying. Self-regulation meaning you have a clear understanding of your strengths, your weaknesses. You know how to operate, behave in certain environments, certain situations. You know how to communicate effectively for a desired outcome, and you're open and welcome to feedback, even if it's feedback that's stuff you're not doing well. Let's say so. It's easier to get a 14-year-old to self-regulate than a senior player, no question. Our under 14s right now, I could send you some video at some point in time, and you should hear their timeouts. You should see them in the change room at halftime. I'm sitting there watching them going, man, I don't want to coach seniors anymore. I want to go back to this age level where it's just pure. This is purity. It's like clean water, and sometimes at the senior level, the waters are a bit muddy, and it takes a while to cleanse it. And sometimes I get to the end of the season. I know I'm getting to the end of this season, Chris, and I'm not having the effect on one of my pro guys I wish I was having. And I know that, we got 2 months left and he's made some progress. But the hole was very big to fill in. And I'm not filling in that hole completely as much as I'd like. I need another 2 years with him. I can't do it next year either. I need 2 more years with him. And I feel I back myself without sounding arrogant. I would back myself to say I could have him in a great frame of mind 2 years from now, but I need 2 more years with him. And we're not going to do it because the club won't bring him back for other reasons. But yeah, with the juniors, it's a no-brainer, man. With the girls, I think it would be awesome. I just haven't done it.
So I'll start. I have 2 questions or 2 additions to what you're saying from 2 coaches that I believe have tried some of this. The one is with a girls' high school team. And he said, I think the pitfall for me this year was knowing the times to have this review process. Some would get offended or hurt, which kind of makes sense. Timing is important, right?
Correct. So to answer that question, I'm going to answer it not knowing the context. Okay. So the timing is important, but on one hand, I want to say no, but I can understand why you would ask that question. Why do I want to say no? Depending on the technique or tool that you're using, that's why I would like to know more context. If that coach is able to write into you and kind of give you the context, that would be even awesome. That would be much better. But I would say
hold on. If you want, I can just unmute him.
Go for it, mate. That would be brilliant.
Damien, can you hear me? You're unmuted.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Go ahead. Give us some context.
Hey, Coach. So a couple of the ways one had to do with me and the others so I coach high school girls basketball here in the States. And the peer-to-peer, sometimes I felt that they would get a little bit more offended depending on their relationships. So that was a little bit of a challenge. And as far as with me, I think sometimes if they were getting frustrated, I saw that the timing of me trying to have that review process with them was maybe not the best time for them to have it. So I kind of struggled with having the timing down as far as when I should be having the review process and everything. You know, I try to go through it a little bit, but that was a little bit of a struggle for me.
Okay. So on that, thank you for that, Coach. I appreciate that. On that topic, let's go with your timing first, and then we'll come back to the peer-to-peer. On your timing, my experience, Damon, is that many coaches I've worked with, because I'm mentoring quite a few coaches at the moment with these type of tools and process. And what I'm finding is, and I felt I was the same, you know, I go back 6 or 7 years, it was the same. I think we have to be very careful of what we are actually reviewing. And what I find is we're trying to review too much. So it's a bit like teaching a curriculum in a school. You've got X amount of time to teach them the science curriculum. And what do teachers do? I could say this being a teacher for 10 years, you know, not too long ago, but we rush through the curriculum because we've got to get through it. We've got to get through the curriculum because once we do that, we tick our box and we feel good. Yeah, but the kids have digested 50%. So what are you better off doing? Let's do 70% of the curriculum and let's do it better. So now they go into the exam and they can recall and retain 65% of it. So I think us as coaches, we need to talk about what are we reviewing, and are we reviewing things that we want them to do or stuff they're capable to do? Are we reviewing stuff that's offense and defense at the same time? Are we reviewing a scout report delivery plus what we want? So my message with this statement is it becomes muddy and it becomes toxic and it becomes frustrating and it becomes too much for the players' mentality when we blow the bubble too big and we try to review too much. So what am I saying? If you watch one of our practices, we'll go like tonight, we'll have about a 25, 30-minute segment. And all it will be on is closing out to shooters. We'll literally play 3-on-3, 4-on-4, 5-on-5. We'll build it up. And the only success criteria I want them to review, and we should talk about that term success criteria because it's linked. The only thing I want our guys to talk about is the closeout and not giving up the three. Why? We play a team on the weekend. They'll have 5 3-point shooters on the floor at any one time. They'll have 4 at any one time. They'll play with 5 a lot of the time. And for us to survive that, we've got to give up drives and then look at the first line of rotation. And then the guy who gets beat, we're telling him just return to the weak side, leave the ball alone. Do not return to the ball. Do not chase the ball after you get beat on the closeout. And that's all we're going to talk about for half an hour. Now, I let the guys in practice call timeouts, and I'll put a time restriction on it and this type of stuff. But in those timeouts, our guys get carried away. And even now in March, they'll still talk about some aspect of offense. And that's where the assistant coach and myself have to be very strong and very pedantic on, guys, stop what you're talking about right now, because that's not something we should be reviewing. We're only reviewing the closeout and what is next after the closeout on defense. What do we want to do next? That is your only topic of conversation. Or if I review something, that's the only thing I'm going to talk about in that segment of practice. So what am I saying in a nutshell, Damien? We need to keep the review process as easy as possible so the players don't feel overloaded and they don't feel like they're drowning with like a sea of information that they're supposed to digest, they're supposed to analyze, they're supposed to review, and then they're supposed to come up with a plan of action after the review, because that's what a review process is. You have an experience, you reflect and review on that experience, and then you come up with a plan for the next time you're about to have that experience. And we're asking guys to do that live and play. There's only so much you can put in that cup before it overflows. So the coach review, the timing of it, from my experience, Damien, just because I've been doing it for quite a period of time now, I don't think there's a wrong time. I don't feel that, my own personal perspective. I think there's a volume problem more than a timing problem. So I would urge you to consider, what are you asking to review? You can go with timing in one aspect, and is it a timing where the player is emotionally losing control? Now you're back to something else. You're probably back to self-regulation, helping him to self-regulate more than reviewing what he did. So again, it's a feeling of what's the temperature of that player in that moment. The peer-to-peer ones are very interesting, really, really interesting. And you're back to selling them the value, and then one-to-ones. If the peer-to-peer is a continuous problem, you're back to one-to-ones and explaining the motive and the value and the why that the peer-to-peer review is happening. Now, what I've recognized with the peer-to-peer one as well is, again, it becomes something they don't talk about that we agreed. So again, I'll give you my example tonight. We start practice. Guys, we're defending 5 3-point shooters on Saturday night. We close out to not give up the 3. So what are we losing? Probably a beaten 1-on-1. Next rotation, drop to help the helper. And now the guy who got beat on the closeout, you are returning to the weak side. You are not chasing the ball. Boom. Nothing else. So when they start talking in game, and all of a sudden they start talking about ball screen coverage, they start talking about, I don't know, switching likes for likes, and it becomes a topic of conversation. That's your job as the coach, and that's your prerogative to go in there and say, right, stop right now. We're now in a stage of unacceptable with how we're reviewing. Everybody or somebody remind me of the success criteria of this segment of practice. It's this, coach. Okay, let's reset. Let's go again. Next time we review, we're on it. We're going to stay strong. We're going to stay hot here on reviewing the success criteria only. Bang, we go again. I don't know if that helps you in any way, Damien, but if you want to give me some more succinct examples, I can see if I can connect with it.
No, I think that's great. I think I've overlooked the success criteria part of it. You know, it just became down to maybe too much on the side of review, but we weren't really emphasizing what are we trying to accomplish in that period of time in practice or in the game. So I think that helps me a lot as far as pairing up the success criteria with the review.
I think you make a great point there, Damon. You make a great point that's very common. And, you know, like I say to you, and I fell victim to this, guys. You know, I really did. So for those of you on this call who are in the early stages of doing this, you know, we call it an athlete-centered type of coaching. I mean, I've got some thoughts on that. I don't believe in calling it that. I'm currently doing a PhD on this stuff, and I don't believe it should be termed athlete-centered coaching, but that's a different conversation. I like to talk it as human needs. What does that human need from me right now? Sometimes they need you to give them the solution. Sometimes they need you to give them the answer. And that's the master coach. Do we know which button to press at what time based on what that player needs? But Damien, you raise a very good point. Coaches, and including myself in my earlier days, I would just ask the players to review. You know, it would be a very generic, okay, guys, review now. And it became almost like, it became almost cosmetic, and it became almost like surface level rubbish that didn't help anybody. players would stand there and feel awkward and look awkward. I'd be trying to, rack my brains for like, okay, I got to say something more now. And then I just end up verbally vomiting on them, telling them what to do anyway. So again, you're right, Damien. You have to connect back to, and you have to stay strong on what the success criteria is. What specifically do you want and need them to review? What specifically is going to help them with what you're doing in that practice? And again, I live by this saying. It was a Serbian performance director who was mentoring me about 7 or 8 years ago. He watched me coach a national team practice. And after the practice, he pulled me aside. We were shooting the breeze, having a conversation. He said to me, Alan, are you asking these guys to do what you want them to do or what they're capable to do? Because there can be a big disparity between that one. And very often we ask them to do things that they're just not ready. The review process is very much aligned to that. They can only cognitively digest, recall, relive stuff in their head so much before it becomes too much. So the success criteria, keeping that focus narrow, helps them to review more effectively. As they get better, which one of our American guys did last year, he was brilliant with this stuff. And he was brilliant. Why? Because he came out of a college system where the coach stole his voice and choice. And he told me he was pre-programmed to know what that coach was about to say and what the coach was thinking. So he felt he never had to think for himself because he knew the coach was always going to think for him and tell him what to do. You have to do X, Y, and Z. You don't touch A, B, and C. And so when he came into our program, this was very refreshing. He was a very mature guy, actually. It was very refreshing for him, even though he battled and really struggled with. Why did he struggle? Because he was a thinker. So he would be thinking about too many things. But actually, when I look at him now, it's changed his career. He's gone on to do bigger and better things and playing in higher levels just because he's able to self-manage live during play. So all this is geared around is how can they become better decision makers live in action under pressure when they have a split second to make a decision. But my voice from the sideline is not impacting that. It's the voice in their own head that's going to have the ultimate decision maker on that one during live play. Hence the reason for this review process is to help them with those moments. So a lot of our reviews at the moment, Damien, sorry I'm going on a long time with this answer, but a lot of our reviews now would be live in action. It wouldn't actually be, we still do the timeouts, they talk, they give their points of view, or the halftime, but the game-changing review process happens live in action, not post-action.
Great stuff. That's why we brought you on, to give these answers, give this depth. So thank you for doing that. Alexander here, coach middle school level. He said the bigger challenge at this level has to do with messages that players are getting that are contradicting, I imagine, what he's saying, but are getting from home peers, club coaches, etc. How do you approach when there are discrepancies between messages that players are getting? Do you get the parents involved, try to focus on the student?
Great question. Great question. And speaking to a lot of you guys who work in the States and working with a couple of coaches in the States, actually, I'm blown away with the challenge you guys have with parents. I'm absolutely blown away by it. In our world here, maybe I've been coaching in inner city London for too long. My biggest issue with parents all my career has been they just don't get involved enough. They see me as somebody that's keeping their kid off the street and out of trouble. Now I've switched club in the past couple of years where it's a bit gone the other way a little bit and some of the parents get involved, but we still don't have a major problem with it. But I do know what works with that, and that's bringing the parent on the journey. So, for example, if I was in your shoes, looking through your eyes, I would be thinking, right, this first meeting I'm going to have with my players to sell them the value of this style of coaching, where I'm going to give the players a voice and a choice, and they're going to share their thoughts and feelings about their performance, their teammates' performance, and the coach's performance on an open, shared platform. Very vulnerable thing to do and a dangerous thing to do if it's not managed well. So now your parents get involved in that. They don't like what's being said or heard, and their kids are coming home, and it's their this kid they see what they're putting on the phone or the WhatsApp group or whatever the platform you're using. And I would take them on the journey, and I would bring them into that very first meeting, and I would sell the value of us doing this the same way I sell it to the players. And I would say to the parents, you are a bigger influencer on your son or daughter than I will ever be. But if you trust your player to play for me, then you trust the system I'm going to put in place and come on the journey with us. And then I would just keep it alive from there. So let the parents come in under review, have an open platform where you're all on it. That's how I would approach it if it was difficult parents. Why? You're basically teaching their son or daughter how to be better employees in 20 years time or 15 years time, when they can think and act for themselves. And in the real world, when they're a teacher or a manager or working in a bank, that they can self-manage and manage their emotions and self-regulate, and you're effectively raising their levels of emotional intelligence, their level of EQ. Why? They have to think about how they communicate, because someone else is going to read their thoughts, so they can't just use blasphemy, or they can't be using damning words. They have to think about how they write about it, and maybe they need some guidance on that. So a lot of the stuff we'll do, coach, will be showing them what's acceptable, but also show them what's unacceptable. So, for example, with your group, you bring the parents in, you bring the players in. Here's an example of an acceptable review, and having there stuff that that player says needs to be better. This X, Y, and Z, you need to be better at this, or whatever you want to do. But show them an acceptable one that's still not pointing the finger, that's still holding somebody accountable. Then I would show them an unacceptable one. So they're very clear about what we want in these reviews and what we don't want in their reviews. But with that acceptable, unacceptable, man, we do that right now with our pro guys. Hey, tonight when you walk into practice, it will be unacceptable right now just for you to be slouching around waiting for me to come on the court. What is acceptable is that you're on one of these side baskets and you're doing your own individual, I forget what one of the guys you on your podcast called. I really liked it, Chris. Let's call your daily dozens. I don't know. You got to work on the ball handling. Vitamins, your daily vitamins. That's the one. So we tell our players all the time what acceptable and unacceptable looks like. So like I said, you were playing a team on the weekend. That's they're going to kill us from the three if we allow it. It will be unacceptable if we're 2 meters off a shooter on the strong side. What's acceptable? Your hands in the cylinder. You can reach out and touch him. So we talk about what does acceptable and what does unacceptable look like in everything. So the players are crystal clear. And I would use that same principle with your parents and those players if you're having those type of interactions that could be quite toxic.
Good stuff. Jake asked, maybe a little departure from this, but a curiosity, which is, I think, normal. What's the biggest difference between American players, the college level players that you get, and then European players that are developed within the European system? And does one style have an advantage over the other, in your opinion?
I can speak quite well on this because of the experience of both. Let's say I think I'm in quite a privileged position where I get to coach our junior national team players right up to senior level. So we travel around Europe. We'll play in the summer. We'll play anybody from Spain to Serbia to Turkey to Russia, whatever. And we get a lot of European pro players come in. Like I've got an Australian guy with us as a senior pro, 2 Spanish guys as senior pros. We'll get a French guy next year or whatever. So I have experience of the junior better players, like the guys who will end up in the NBA at some point, like Luka Samanic from Croatia. We have to guard him 2 years ago. Now he's playing for Brooklyn. So different levels. And we travel all over Europe. And then on the other hand, I've got the privilege of bringing in, first-time pros from college. Like this year, I got 2 Division II guys. So last year, we had a D1 guy. So we'll bring in 2 Americans every year. And I played in this type of system as well. But in Ireland, where we would bring in 2 Americans every year. And I want to be careful what I say, but I'm going to be, transparent. The guys we bring in from the States always need the biggest time to adjust, and not just with the refereeing or the style of game or the FIBA rules, but they actually need the biggest adjustment for me personally, they need the biggest with Mike's, with how I coach, the biggest adjustment they need is that as a coach, I'm interested in what you're thinking. I'm interested in your opinion, and I'm interested in you solving the problem and me not bailing you out all the time. And What I find with the American guys is they're very hot with me early on, going, Coach, just tell me what to do, what you want from me. Tell me. I'm like, well, what can you do? I don't know what I want from you. I want X, Y, and Z, but maybe you can do A, B, C as well. I don't know. Let's find out. Let's go on a journey and find out how good you could be at playing in the low post. But no, I never played in low post in college. All right, different world, different league. Let's see how you operate in this league. It might be something, So the biggest disparity for me is the feelings they have that this is not a dictatorship, and I'm not the principal of a school cracking a whip. I'm a coach who's going to take you on a journey where your voice and your thoughts matter a lot. And I want to learn as much from them as they do from me. I don't say it that way. I don't say it that way because I think it might discourage them from my competency and ability, and they might see it as fluff. But I take them on that journey, and a lot of it's covert. I do it covertly. I'm not really overt with the American guys about it. Another disparity between them is the reality is the tactical awareness, decision making, and I have to be honest with that. The European guys, sometimes they're light years ahead of decision making. What they see, their lens is wider. It's not as narrow. And when I'm watching when I'm scouting, I'm talking to the agents, or I'm watching the college games these guys have played in that I'm bringing in as a rookie. They're limited in what they do because they're limited in what they're allowed to do, is what I see. That might not be the case for every. I don't want to be portrayed here as branding everybody with the same brush. But from the guys we've had over the past 5 years, it's been very much one-dimensional guys who are going to come in and fulfill a role. But I've tried my best to look at it. I'm in a club where I'm very lucky, guys. If we lose, I don't get sacked. And I'm very privileged with that. So it gives me the freedom to try to help people for the bigger picture, like I said, to help you with your future, to make you a better player. So in 2 years' time, you can go to second division Spain and make 4 times the money you make here and fulfill your dreams and desires. And they ain't doing that unless they can think for themselves. They ain't doing that unless they've got better technical ability as well. So for me, the biggest one are those two things: the ability to think and act for yourself, and then actually the tactical awareness of the game.
And then probably a follow-up question, Coach Ableton. What are some of the best things you have seen help in developing that decision-making in Europe? And I'm imagining it's a lot more game-based play.
100%, man. 100%. It's someone put up a definition on Twitter last week, and I loved it. These academic guys, man, I can't get enough. I'm a basketball coach, fellas. That's my life. I'm just lucky that I've made a decision to pursue a PhD in coaching, and I've got about timeline of January 2021. I'm nearly there. I'm almost over it doesn't feel like it, but so I'm surrounding myself at the moment with a lot of academics, and these guys. Someone put up on Twitter last week what a true definition of games-based learning was, the GBA, the games-based approach, and the difference between that and constraints-led approach. And I don't want to go down that route, but what I'm saying to you is the games-based approach is such a unique topic, Chris, and you'll know this as an advocate of that style of coaching, that you put that on Twitter, man, you better have the shield ready, because you're going to have to fight a battle with a lot of guys, because the reality is this: it's a misconception. It's not a case of rolling the balls out, playing 3-on-3, playing 4-on-4, playing 5-on-5. But to answer your question, Chris, when we travel around Europe, and I watch a lot of clinics, I watch a lot of practice sessions, I speak to coaches every week. I jump on one of these Zoom calls, and I speak to a coach from a different country every single week, and I've been doing that for a year and a half. And it's the best form of CPD I've done. But those European coaches and clubs you talk about and what we do here, there will always be an element of pressure, be it from a defensive player, be it from a decision that needs to be made. So we're back to what we call the perception-action coupling. What is the perception? And let me preempt the perception-action coupling. It's the word anticipation. So not what are you seeing and what are you going to do? What are you likely to see and what are you going to do? So let's go one step earlier and start to talk about anticipation. What could happen? And then now the next stage is what's happening, your perception of what's happening, and then your decision. So in all our practices, you'll have I'll never do a drill where maybe it might be a warm-up, but even in the warm-up, we're into 2-on-1s pretty quick. Like we play with, you guys know flow offense, right? It seems to be the sensation across the nation, especially in Australia the past couple of years. But, and some
big
guys
time in the NCAA college game too, Coach. Big time.
Yeah, it's taken off. I see that. I stopped watching college basketball, but I did notice it following you guys on Twitter. But the thing, we warm up, we call it spread. Why do we call it spread? I believe it started in Lithuania, and they call it spread ball screen offense. But anyway, so it's a bit like the Dejan Bodiroga. What's that move that the guy in the playground in New York, the Shamgod. Everyone calls that dribble the Shamgod. That was Dejan Bodiroga in Serbia back in the 70s, or in the 80s. And I think flow was originally called spread. So we call it spread. And we warm up every practice with 2-on-0 spread, just side pick and roll, basically reverse through the big side pick. And within about 2 minutes, we're putting a defensive player on the guy coming out of the corner. So it's 2-on-1. And then we'll go 3-on-1, and then we'll go 3-on-2, and then we'll go 3-on-3. So our warm up is the same. And we're just looking for different reads off these ball screens, or we'll look for different actions on the tree side, on the double side where you got the two guards and different things. But what I see, Chris, and I've kind of diverged a little bit, apologies, guys. What I see is a lot of decision-making practices, most drills where there's an element of pressure. It's not repetition. Hey, listen, how good was Gannon Baker's comment? Bones, not cones. Huh?
Bones over cones.
Bones over cones, man. I've been singing that around the office after I heard it, but you will find the same in us, man. I don't know. When he said that, I was thinking, when's the last time I pulled a cone out of the store cupboard? When's the last time I used that rebound net they have in there where you bounce the ball off the net? And we, even our individuals, we do individuals, and I'll never take one kid over to the gym. It'll always be two. So there's always an element of defense, whether it's modified defense or it's full defense. And that's what I see in Europe. The young kids playing. I was in Valencia, guys, at Christmas for 2 weeks. And if you ever get a chance to go to Valencia, the basketball club, the EuroLeague club, I urge you to go there. It's the setup is amazing. And, the club's philosophy, the principles, everything they do is amazing. Pascal Myers is there. I don't know if you know the name, Chris. Pascal Myers. I think you might have had him on the podcast. Yeah, he's there at the moment.
He just left for a coaching job, actually, but he was there and having a great experience.
Yeah, amazing place. But when I went around, I was watching their younger teams practice, and it's full court press. I'm talking under 10s here. Like, they're pressing full court. All their drills are pretty much full court based, so the kids are really like put under pressure with stuff. And it was always defense. It wasn't a lot of isolation drills. It wasn't a lot of on-air drills, So similar to, that's how we're doing it here as well at the moment, the club I'm in. But some don't agree with it, but I'll back myself on that one.
Well, I support you. Obviously, the whole website is devoted to that, basically. And my general rule for coaches, if you want to develop a decision-making drill, is just to think about removing one defender. If it's an offensive, if you're doing 4-on-4, make it a 4-on-3, and then it becomes a decision-making drill because there's going to be an advantage. It's a question of whether you can find it. And that's an initial building block, in terms of a progression. You don't need the on-air to build that because there's an advantage, and we've reduced the load and the challenge. So
what's exciting about the game-based stuff, Chris, is I think you as a coach, you're forced to become unique, and you're forced to think outside the box. So think about how your team play. What can you create that's a snapshot of that game? What can you create? Like, I loved, who did you speak to? Ross McMains. Ross who's out in Melbourne at the moment. He talked to you about, the touch the line drill that everyone does, 4 guys across the free throw line, 4. He was putting 2 in the other line and 1 back here and mixing it up, and now became a different challenge, And I think when you take snapshots of your game, how you want to play, you can come up with some really cool game-based activities. And that are, it's not something you got off YouTube. It's not something you've seen. This is an evolution, isn't it? We're coming up with these things. But if you look at how you play, how you want to play, you can come up with a load of small-sided games. And like Chris said, take one defensive player out or put one in. Make it 3-on-4 even, as you go up the levels or whatever.
Coach, the other thing I just want to say, based on what you're saying there, is I had a conversation, and a lot of you will guess who it is when you hear the podcast, with a pretty famous coach in the world. And when I started talking and kind of challenging in a really polite way about some of the drills and on-air stuff, what I realized even more, and I realized this throughout my tours, but coaches don't know what they don't know. And that's the thing. It's not, there's a resistance to it because they simply don't know anything about it. They don't know any of the evidence. What they think experientially is fine, but they have no evidence to anything that they speak about based on research. And then more importantly, they don't know anything about the other side. So it just becomes, again, a resistance to something they don't know. And, I think we're making great gains with people like you and obviously, hopefully myself, in sharing these ideas.
I think, Chris, I find those coaches the most interesting. And in our world here in the UK, you're going to find more coaches aligned that way than the way we would like.
Mm-hmm.
And Chris, I truly embrace these guys because they're my challenge. And they're my challenge of how influential I can be. So I look at it as no different to working with the player. How can I connect, number one? And how can I get them to see value in this style of coaching? Because the reality, what I face every summer, Chris, is when I go to the national team, some of these players are coming from these programs where the coaches would be very resistant to how I'm going to coach. They are a big challenge, these guys, but they are the reason why I enjoy doing what I'm doing. And it's not that my way is the best way or their way is the worst way. It's not about that at all. And I normally pitch it along the line of, I don't want to ever change how a coach coaches. I just want him to see it from another angle and then make a calculated judgment on what he feels is best. But open your door and let it in for a period of time and then make a judgment on it after that. But like you said there, it becomes an ignorance at the time when you're not even going to consider it for a second or hear out what the value of it could be. But those guys are generally more malleable, I feel, when you approach it like you would approach a player. So can I share with you like a difficult conversation, my process to have a difficult conversation with somebody? Can I share that with you, Chris?
Yeah, we probably have about 10 minutes left, just that far.
My process for this one is, I'll be quick. I got it from a guy called Stephen Rolnick, who you should all check out. He's incredible. And I won't give his backstory. Definitely someone for your podcast, Chris, but he working in sport now, clinical psychologist, 30 years worked in medicine. So he would have people come into his office, and these could be people who are having suicidal thoughts or, different things, extreme stuff. And he would have 15 minutes to really facilitate some change talk with these guys. And the first thing he would talk about is open-ended questions. I got to connect with them, but I'm going to do it through an opening question. The second thing is I need to listen with empathy. So empathic listening. Because the last thing I want to do is have a confrontation with this guy who I'm trying to change how he thinks and acts. And then the third thing is I'm going to make a connection by summarizing what he says to me and ask him, would that be correct summary? And there's your connection. Because I think these coaches, Chris, we come across are resistant to us or a certain way for a particular reason. But I think us as advocates of this style of coaching and see the benefit is the solution for us is not to fight back or fight a fire with a fire. It's actually, how can I form a connection with this coach? Forget trying to convince him that the athlete-centered approach is better. Forget trying to convince him the games-based approaches are better. Let me find a way to establish a connection with him that he feels like I value him and I'm going to listen to him. And then after you get to that stage, can you approach, well, let's consider this way. Let's have a conversation about coaching. That's my thoughts on that one, Chris. But let's move in a different direction because we have about 10 minutes, as you said.
No, but I just want to add quickly to that. I experienced that having moved to the United States way more. Conversations about climate change, about politics, about the earth being flat, all these different things. And I apply that exact technique because I researched it too. It's great stuff. And we'll definitely get his name and get him on the podcast for that. So a few quick hits here. Where and how are you getting your PhD in coaching? And just for the person that asked, you can look up coaching studies, coach pedagogy. There's a lot of different names for it, but go.
Yep. I'm doing my PhD with a university here in the UK, Liverpool John Moores. I did a master's through the Lithuanian University, which is basically Lithuanian Basketball Federation. And we talked a lot about the topics you just raised there: coach pedagogy, coaching concepts, coaching principles. But my PhD is basically around me. It sounds egotistical, but I'm doing a case study on myself and my assistant coaches. So what am I doing it on? And we're kind of using our players to drive all the data. It's basically an assessment on the impact, how I can get my players to self-regulate when under pressure in the moment, during a game, during a practice, when they're at their worst in terms of emotional control. And it's a lot to do with helping them to be better. It's a lot to do with stuff we've talked about on this podcast or on this Zoom call. So how effective are the tools, concepts, principles, techniques I'm using during the practice, during the game live? How effective are these at helping the player ultimately to become a better decision maker, to self-regulate better, and to arrive to their desired outcome of making better decisions on the court? That's it in a nutshell. And the way I'm doing it is record every practice, mic myself up. It's a lot of generating data from that. One-to-ones with the players, getting feedback, using some type of academic questionnaires to measure their progress over the course of the season. And the unique part of it is I'm miking up the assistant coaches and doing a study on how well am I coaching them up with these principles. It's a bloody headache, guys, but I love it.
Coach Appleton, I love your question here. Number one is basketball immersion. So go through that, and then if you can remind me in a few weeks, maybe I will make this a topic of a masterclass as well, because he's asking about a little bit more depth on the development system that's happening in Europe, and we might be able to circle back and kind of get into that topic a little bit more. One last question here, Coach, from a member. Can you talk about the two-step process of getting commitment and then reviewing the execution of the? How do you reinforce that in practice?
Yeah. There's a logical process that we'll always follow when we review, and we'll never waver on this. This is a non-negotiable. When we go through, great question, because we should have talked about this a lot earlier. When we go through a review process with the guys, we're having a moment right now. I'm reviewing with Chris. Well, the first thing I want Chris to say, if he's doing an effective review and he's saying stuff that's going to add value, he must first of all talk about, did we nail our non-negotiables before we talk tech-tac? So what are your non-negotiables? For us, for our team at the moment, our non-negotiables are commit. Commit is 1, effective communication is 2, and positive touches is 3. So what are those non-negotiables? Those non-negotiables are something that we can't go without. Like the foundation of your house has all that substance, all that material. You can't build a house without that foundation. So the flat screen TV, the roof, the beautiful windows, can't go up, can't go in there unless the foundation's solid. So we're never going to take away that foundation. So for us, it's those 3. The guys came up with this, by the way. They decided that. Commitment, effective communication, which is a whole different topic, and you could talk an hour about it, so let's not go there. And the third one is positive touches. We'll come into a timeout. Boys will call a timeout, and very often they forget to review the non-negotiables, and that's the behavioral stuff. So, for example, they'll come into a timeout. I'll go and listen, and they'll start talking tactics. I'll say, hang on a minute. That's the success criteria of this drill. But on a scale of 0 to 10, 8 being acceptable, 8 and above being acceptable, where were you with your non-negotiables? Oh, it was like a 6. Why was it a 6? Well, we didn't fully commit all the time. All right, don't talk tactics. Don't talk about success criteria. Get your butts back out there. Go again. Only after you nail the non-negotiables, which is the behavioral stuff, then can you review the success criteria of the drill. So, Coach, great reminder. Whatever coach said that, big shout out to you. That's a great reminder that your review process, first of all, has to pass the test of your non-negotiables before you can talk tech-tac. And that's just a logical order of priority. Behavior over technical, tactical. Why? If they're not fully committing, then what are you actually reviewing? You're reviewing a subpar effort from your guys. So now you're accepting and layering poor habits, bad habits, which is to not commit to every choice they make. They can make the wrong choices, but what they can't do is not commit to the choice they make. That's what it ultimately goes back to.
tremendous. Great stuff. And that was from Mark Jablonski, who Jabo is the host of the wrap-up show
Nice.
for the basketball podcast on Sundays. And it's great to have him. I would have unmuted him, but I guess he's out of work. So, these little things that happen. So,
Awesome.
but awesome. Coach, we can't thank you enough. Tremendous stuff. You made an impact on our community. I know it aligns very much with a lot of the way the coaches think in our communities. Thanks for taking the time, and all the best for the rest of your season. Coaches who joined us, thank you. Awesome, and we'll keep doing some like this, and I'm sure Alan will come back at some point, when we get that. I think the other question was, and Alan will share it with me, and I'll be able to post it for you guys, is just some of those examples that you talked about, some of the, I think it was timeouts and different things like that, some of those videos you mentioned previously. Trying to find where they are anyways. But
No
if you
problem,
can share those.
Chris. Yeah, Chris, I'll send you some videos, Chris, and you can just put it up in your membership group, and you guys are more than welcome to ask for more. No problem, man. We record everything.
Wonderful.
Everything but the lunch and dinner. So that's it.
Wonderful.
Hey, thank you,
Awesome.
guys. I appreciate it. It was good. Really enjoyed it. And thank you very much, guys.
Thank you.